HighBridge, a division of recorded books, presents The Dark Flood, a Bene Griessel novel, by Deon Meyer, read by Saul Reichlin.
We are in danger of destroying ourselves by our greed and stupidity. Stephen Hawking. As a secular psychological concept, greed is an inordinate desire to acquire or possess more than one needs. Wikipedia. July. Chapter 1. Captain Bene Griessel heard the racing footsteps, the urgent shout. His Hawk's colleague, Vusi Ndabeni, calling them. Come quickly! There's a cash-in-transit heist happening right now. A Tuesday morning in July, midwinter. He abandoned the dossier on his desk, grabbed his Z88 from the drawer, and ran. Vusi was small of stature, the quiet one, always calm, but not now. The urgency in his voice meant Griessel did not hesitate. He fastened his holster around his hips as he ran down the passage. Vaughn Cupido was approaching, long coat flapping behind him, his bat suit, his winter gear. "Praise the Lord," said Cupido. Vaughn hated the tedium of police paperwork. They had been buried in dossiers for days. This was a reprieve. Captains Frankie Philander and Moy Willem Liebenberg emerged from their shared office, shoes drumming on the bare tiled floor of the Directorate for Priority Crimes Investigation, the DPCI, in Belleville, a herd stampeding to the armory on the first floor. Ndabeni was already inside, passing out R5 assault rifles and spare magazines. Warrant Officer Bossi Bossert scribbling hurried notes in his inventory. "I want a Stompy," said Cupido. Vusi gave him the short Beretta RS-200 shotgun with the pistol grip and a cartridge belt. "You always gotta be otherwise, eh?" said Philander. "It's a cash-in-transit heist, not a bank robbery." "Method in my madness, uncle," said Cupido. "Just wait and see." "Just bring them back," Bossert shouted after them. At morning parade over the previous 5 months, they had been kept informed of Vusi's investigation. He had been working on the flurry of in-transit heists in the Western Cape. The same gang, the same modus operandi. 10 men in 4 stolen cars would ambush the transit van. One vehicle, always old and heavy, would be deliberately rammed into the security van, forcing it to a standstill. The other cars would encircle it and open fire with, according to post-action ballistic tests, AK-47s and an exotic collection of small arms, until the guards surrendered, or explosives would be used on the rear doors if they would not. An estimated 14 million rand had already been stolen. The robbers were phantoms. They left no solid forensic evidence behind. Ndabeni was at his wits' end and under extreme pressure from his commanding officer, Colonel Mbali Kaleni. So now the 5 detectives raced off at 150 kilometers per hour in 2 unmarked cars, the BMW X3 leading and the Ford Everest behind, to the N1 first, then heading east. Griessel's phone rang. It was Vusi from the leading BMW, driven by Philander. "Vusi?" Ndabeni had to shout over the wailing of the sirens. "I believe the robbers have a police radio, so we'll restrict comms to the phone. It's a very hot tip from my new informant, very credible. They're going to hit a Pride security van on the R45 between Malmesbury and Paarl." Griessel repeated the lowdown to Cupido behind the wheel and Liebenberg, both of them in the Ford with him. "I've notified Paarl. They're dispatching their task force," said Ndabeni. Griessel shared the update with his colleagues. "Shit show," said Cupido. He had little faith in the rural police force's abilities. "I called Pride Security. They'll reroute the van," said Vusi. "So we're hoping to get the gang while they're waiting." "Do we know where they'll be?" asked Griessel. "At the junction of the R45 and the Achterpaal Road," said Vusi, adding, "The chopper is coming too." They drove with majestic blue mountains looming ahead, the Boeland beautiful in the clear light of the brisk, bright winter's day. It was, as Cupido described it afterwards, a clusterfuck of majestic proportions, right from the very start, because the thieves had a radio tuned to the frequency of Pride Security. The van's new route was broadcast straight to them. Because Vusi chose the R44, reckoning it would be quicker than driving through Paarl, sirens or no sirens. And because Mrs. Barbara van Aswegen, farmer's wife in the homestead just 60 meters from the scene of the crime, would hear the shots and immediately phone the Paarl South African Police Service, who in turn would notify the task force where the action was. And then she would unlock the safe and take out her husband's .308 Winchester hunting rifle. But first the robbers overtook the van. They struck just past the Windmeelkelder wine cellar, where the dual carriageway flowed like the confluence of two rivers into a single road. An old, solid 1995 model Mercedes S500 rammed with a dull boom into the side of the armored security vehicle. The Pride driver, pumped up on adrenaline, fear, and desperate determination, was driving too fast. He overcompensated in his response to the collision, spinning the steering wheel to the right, but at that moment the Mercedes wasn't in contact, and the van swerved too sharply. It rolled 2, 3, 4 times and scraped across the tar, sparks flying, metal screeching, a high-pitched keening. Finally, it came to rest on its left side, in the middle of the road. The 4 heist vehicles encircled the van, the Mercedes in front to fend off any approaching traffic, 2 on the sides and 1 behind. The robbers leapt out and began firing at the security van, their usual tactic. They knew the van's windows and panels were bulletproof, but the hammering hail of lead was so terrifying that guards would usually surrender. They emptied their magazines, and in the silence of reloading gave the men in the van a chance to emerge with their hands in the air, so that the rear doors could be unlocked without further exchange of fire. But not this time. The guards were hanging in their seat belts, injured, shocked, afraid. The robbers went for Plan B. The 2 from the rear vehicle ran to the van with the explosives. They pressed the package expertly against the joint between the doors, ran back to shelter behind their car, and hit the detonator. The blast boomed across the winter bare vineyards, so that the children of Slot van die Parel Primary School looked up at their teacher in alarm. A ballooning cloud of flame and black smoke rose up from the van. Ears ringing, the hijackers didn't hear the sirens of the approaching hawks. Vusi Ndabeni was the first to spot the smoke from the explosion. "Ndoyeyika," he said, pointing it out to Philander. "Bastard," said Frankie, the old veteran. He looked back at the passenger seat where his rifle lay. Their hearts began to race. Philander braked instinctively. Vusi phoned Griessel. "Do you see the smoke?" "Yes," said Benny, and pointed it out to the other 2 in the Everest. "Forgot," said Cupido. "Party time." Griessel felt an intense craving for the calming effect of a Jack Daniels. He was a rehabilitating alcoholic, more than 200 days now since his last drink. He and Liebenberg smacked back the folding butts of their R5s and cocked them, thumbs on the large safety mechanisms. Cupido braked to keep his distance from the BMW. The two gangsters standing guard at the Mercedes, looking out for approaching traffic, saw and heard the Hawks simultaneously. They yelled to the other 8 who were carrying the cash boxes out of the back of the Pride van, but it was too late. When they fired the first shots at the Saps cars, the BMW and Everest had already screeched to a halt, sideways across the road. The detectives piled out on the safe side of the vehicles. They sheltered behind the cars and returned fire. Cupido, whose Stompy wasn't built for this range, had his Glock 17 in both hands. The crackle of gunfire, lead smacking against all 3 of the vehicles and the road surface. Bullets whizzed past the men, some only a whisker away, the chemical tang of propellant charges heavy in the air. A moment of hesitation for the 8 cash box carriers as they weighed up their options. Should they help shoot or get the loot into the getaway vehicles as fast as possible? The road to Paarl was still open behind them. The leader, sinewy, clever, and fearless in his orange beanie, had many hits experience behind him. He didn't rate the ability of policemen, was sure his mates could keep them busy long enough. He shouted at the others to get the boxes into the cars. He had no idea of Frankie Philander's talents. Philander was one of the top marksmen in the DPCI, better known as the Hawks, in the Cape. And his previous experience with the Saps in Mitchell's Plain had taught him to be calm under heavy fire. He set his R5 on semi-automatic and lay on the ground at the back of the BMW. His colleagues provided covering fire. He waited for his chance, lined up the first Mercedes man through the larger foremost ring sight of the rifle. He shot him high in the right shoulder. The man jerked and dropped his AK. Philander swung the barrel to the left. He could see only one arm of the other man by the Mercedes, where the elbow bent as he cradled the AK. He aimed, taking the constant movement of the arm into consideration, and fired. The 5.56 by 45 round shattered the elbow. The man screamed out his pain and shock. No one was shooting back at them now. That was the moment that Benny Griessel thought, "We've got this under control. Today the good guys win." Then the cavalry thundered in. Chapter 2. The Boulant task force arrived from the direction of Paarl, east. The Hawks had come from the direction of Butterfly World, west. A perfect pincer movement. If they had planned it in advance, it would have been a deadly flanking strategy that would have caught the gangsters neatly in the crossfire. But they hadn't planned it in advance. The radio silence, the smoke of the explosion and gunfire, the thugs running back and forth to load boxes, blasting off wild shots in between, meant that at first the task force commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pila Zamisa, wasn't even aware of the Hawks on the far side of the commotion. He and his troops, in their black bulletproof urban combat jackets, Heckler & Koch MP5N machine pistols, R5 rifles, and a Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle, stopped and jumped out and began shooting. The 8 remaining robbers dived under and behind vehicles, and most of the task force's shots smacked into the Hawks' vehicles. One hit Moy Willem Liebenberg, whose good looks meant he was known as the Hawks' weapon of mass seduction, on the cheek. Mercifully, it was a mere scratch, a bloody streak below his left ear, and the task force kept on shooting. The Hawks ceased fire. They could see the task force. "What did I say? Shit show!" yelled Vaughn Cupido. "Fuck!" said Griessel. "I'll call them!" shouted Vusi. He had Colonel Zamisa's number. He lay just under the nose of the BMW, wiggled his phone out of his jacket, and called. It took a while before the officer answered. Ndabeni screamed as hard as he could over the clatter and booms, and eventually Zamisa understood. Silence descended on the scene. and in the homestead, right next to the road, farmer's wife Barbara van Aswegen had been listening intently to the running battle. She was alone at home, but she was ready, the hunting rifle firmly in her hands. Now was the time, she decided, to act, to protect hearth and home. She lifted the gun and let rip. At the white, unmarked Hawk's cars directly in her line of sight. To her it was obvious that these men were part of the gang of hijackers. Benny Griessel heard the shot somewhere from the left as the round smacked into the Everest, directly above him. He cursed and dropped to his haunches. Another shot, again into the Ford. "Yes," said Cupido. Frankie Philander could see Van Aswegen. "It's an auntie," he yelled, and then to her, "Auntie, we're the police this side." But she kept on shooting. Griessel heard Vusi's phone ring, most likely Colonel Zamisa calling from the other side to hear what was going on. And then he saw the raiders exploiting the confusion, making a run for it, south, away from the farmer's wife, over the fence into the vineyard. "Come on, Vaughn, Willem," he shouted as he reloaded his R5, jumped up and ran after them. The gangsters were younger, more agile. Griessel was cycling fit, but he'd never been a sprinter or a fence hurdler. Cupido was much more of an athlete, but that was before he'd piled on 16 kilograms over the last few years. And Mooi Willem Liebenberg wanted to help, but at that moment Mrs. van Aswegen shot out the passenger window near his head. Glass showered over him, and he dropped down flat. Benny was first over the fence and racing through the long row of poplar trees hemming the road. He could see the 8 robbers running past the whitewashed outbuildings of the farm on the crest of the slope. And out of the corner of his eye, the task team people also coming up on his left flank. He looked back. Cupido's stylish long coat had snagged in the fence as he leapt over, carrying the pistol-grip shotgun in his hand. "I'm coming, Benna." Griessel ran. The ground was sodden from the recent rain and slippery. He reached the top at last. He would have to stop at the outbuildings, take a careful look around the corner. He skidded to a halt, feet slipping out from underneath him, and he came down hard. Leapt up, trousers, elbows muddied. The raiders were in full flight. He wanted to raise his R5 and shoot, but there was a row of labourers' cottages up ahead. 4 task force officers were approaching rapidly along the farm road, but still too far off to intercept the robbers. He ran on, breath rasping, lungs on fire. At the cottages he had to stop again to look. The fugitives were running down into the hollow beyond the dam at full speed. He lifted his rifle, fired 3 shots. It made no difference. Something wasn't right. He counted the running figures. There were only 7 robbers between the long rows of winter bare vines, and they had split up. One group swung right, the other 3 kept straight on. The task force men reached him. He recognized Colonel Zamisa. "Ah, Benny," said Zamisa, "come with me. We'll take those 3. He motioned to his teammates to follow the group of 4. Griessel looked back. Cupido was 30 meters behind. "Vaughn, one of them has gone into a worker's house here," he shouted. "Leave the fucker to me," said Cupido, gasping for breath. Zamisa took off. He was in his 40s, but he was fast. Griessel had to push hard to keep up. "There's a primary school there," said Zamisa while running, and pointed east. "Shit," said Griessel, as that could mean hostages and a whole load of trouble. But the 3 fugitives swung north suddenly towards a stand of pine trees. "They want to double back to their vehicles," said Zamisa. Griessel didn't have the breath to answer. Cupido stood close to the labourer's cottage at the top, leaning his hand against the wall while he caught his breath. He would have to lose weight. It was a long time since he'd been this fat and unfit. What was he going to do? His banting diet just wasn't getting off the ground. He blamed his girlfriend. Desiree Coetzee loved cooking and dining out. There were always sweet treats in the house, and he couldn't resist. He saw them sprinting away over the rolling landscape, his colleague and the task force guys. From across the road he could still hear single shots, the farmer's wife shooting at Vusi and the rest of them. He shook his head. Clusterfuck. He peered around the corner, looked down the road that ran between the row of 4 small buildings and an avenue of trees. All quiet. A movement in the trees. He lifted the shotgun, although he knew it was too far for that particular weapon. It was a child, a small colored boy, maybe 5 years old, peeping out, a frightened little face. Cupido crept around the corner, keeping close to the wall, towards the boy. Shots rang out in the distance, to the south. The child jumped, startled. Cupido tried the door of the first house. It was locked. The robber could have locked it from inside. The boy was motioning to him. Vaughn looked. A tiny finger pointed at the third house. He jogged closer, as lightly as he could, up to the boy. "Is he in there?" Little head nodding. "Is there someone else in there?" "The baby." "The baby? Where's his mama?" The child pointed again, this time towards the farmyard. He whispered, "She went to fetch wood, uncle. It's cold." Cupido nodded. "Stay there behind the tree. Lie flat." The child nodded solemnly and lay down, hands over his ears. Vaughn walked across the little stoop to the closed door of the cottage. He put the shotgun down on the cement, pulled off his coat, put that down beside the firearm on the stoop. He didn't want it to get in his way. He picked up the RS-200 again, stood to the side of the door, back against the wall. "Come out, and I won't shoot you," he shouted. Shots boomed from inside. The wooden door splintered, an AK-47 on automatic. The baby inside began to wail. Cupido waited until the magazine was empty. Then he kicked the door open and dived inside. He rolled once, aiming the shotgun at the robber from his prone position, flat on his belly on the floor. The living room was small, the man standing behind a couch. The baby lay on the couch, its high-pitched shrieks slicing through marrow and bone. The gangster had a pistol in his hand, the barrel pressed to the baby's cheek. "I'll kill the baby," he said to Cupido, his eyes wild. Vaughn realized Philander had been right. The Stompy was the wrong choice. If he fired now, the shot would hit the baby too. Chapter 3. "Take it easy, brother," said Cupido. He held his left hand up high, spreading the fingers of his gun hand open in a gesture of surrender, and rose slowly to his feet. "Drop the gun," the man said. The pistol pressed against the baby was shaking. The child shrieked louder. "Okay," said Cupido. "Easy." He slowly shifted the Stompy to his left hand as he crouched, never taking his eyes off the man. He lowered the shotgun to the floor, slowly, inch by inch. He knew the moment he let go of it, the man would lift his pistol and shoot him. "See, I'm going to put it down softly," he said, wanting to keep the robber's attention on the shotgun so he could reach his right hand into the back of his belt. He had to get the timing right. "You want me to kick it over to you?" he asked, just before he put the Stompy down. The baby screamed, ear-splitting. He asked again, louder, "You want me to kick it over to you?" The man didn't answer. He was wound tight as a spring, but his eyes followed the RS-200. Outside, Cupido heard a woman's voice, full of fear. "My child, my child." Vaughn dropped the gun the last few centimeters to the floor. His right hand grasped the butt of the Glock 17 behind his back. He pulled it out. The man raised his pistol. Cupido dived and shot. 2 shots rang out in unison. Colonel Zamisa was 7 strides ahead of Benny at the long stone wall. The pine trees were still a short distance ahead. Griessel's lungs were burning. He had to lean up against the cold stones for a bit. His hair, as usual 1 hair cut behind, now messier than ever. His almond-shaped eyes, which had been described as Slavic, were squinting in the bright sunlight. He thought, I'm too old for these shenanigans. 46, but yes, the mileage on him was much more than that. The shooting has stopped, said Zamisa. The farmer's wife had come to her senses. Griessel nodded. It's a cemetery, said Zamisa. He had to stand on tiptoe to see over the wall and peer through a few cypress trees. Griessel did the same. The Slot van die Parel churchyard was about 100 meters long and 50 wide. The wall ran right around it, with a gate on the opposite side from where they were standing. A few hundred graves. Then a flash of movement. The barrel of a Russian assault rifle only just protruding from behind a large marble headstone. One of the gang hiding. They're in there, he said. Zamisa hesitated for a moment. Benny, you go around to the gate. I'll wait for you to cover me. When you start shooting, I'll come over the wall. Catch them by surprise. Right, said Griessel. He took off, crouching slightly to stay below the wall. He crept around to the right, the shorter route to the gate, trying to keep his footsteps as quiet as possible. It was relatively easy on the moist, soft soil and grass. Around the first corner he ran along the short side of the churchyard. No sound, just pigeons cooing in the cypress trees. A lizard scuttled across the ochre stones as he approached. Around the final corner. One of them, on guard at the gate, crouching, AK in his hands. But he was looking north, away from Benny. Then he heard the detective approach and turned. Griessel dived flat to offer the smallest possible target, aimed and fired 2 rapid shots. The man toppled over backwards. Shots from inside, smacking harmlessly against the other side of the wall. Benny realized Zamisa would think that was his covering fire. The colonel would be jumping over the wall now. Griessel leapt up, headed for the gate. On the other side of the wall he heard shots, the task force commander's R5 firing. Outside the labourer's cottage, the mother of the baby screamed, a shrill lament over the wailing of the child. Cupido heard her footsteps running over the cement. "Stay outside!" he shouted. He didn't want her to see the hijacker with a gaping wound where his right eye should be. He jumped up, pushed the Glock back into his belt, picked up the baby very, very carefully, and turned round. She was standing in the doorway, a small, delicate woman, barely in her 20s. A keening, high and continuous, from her mouth as she held out her arms for her child. He passed the baby to her, still wailing inconsolably. "Come," he said, "everything is okay." He walked back, picked up the stompy, steered the woman outside. He looked at the hole in the wall left by the gangster's bullet. It had missed him by millimeters. Fuck. He went out to go and say thank you to the boy. Griessel charged in through the churchyard gate. A shot hit the wall right beside him. Stone shards and dust flew into his right eye. He crashed down behind a grave. More bullets whacking all around. Tears blinded him, and he dropped the R5, trying to wipe the dust from his eyes. A moment of silence. The shooting ceased. He heard the footsteps just in time. The hijacker thought he was hit, Griessel reckoned. He was coming to finish him off. He grabbed the rifle, rolled onto his back, lifted the R5, waited. His sight was blurred, his eyes still not clear. The man appeared in the pathway with a murderous...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?